So now that our player can move left and right, let's add in the logic to use the jetpack. We'll go back into our player script, and we're going to add two variables here in order to help track one, whether the player is standing, and two, what the jet speed actually is going to be. Here you'll see we'll create the variable standing, which is a Boolean, and by default, it's going to be false. And now we can create the jet speed variable. This is going to be a float, and we're going to set this to 15. Now, before we move on, we're going to need to get the absolute value of the y velocity, just like we did with the x. So let's copy this entire line of code and paste it below, making sure to change this absolute velocity to y and the rigid body velocity to y as well. Also below it, we're going to want to make sure that we know when the player is standing. Here we'll test that the absolute value of y is less than 0.2. Now, we can tell that if the velocity is less than 2, the player is standing. If it is not, we'll copy this variable over and reset it to false. Next, let's look into how we can actually make the player fly up. Underneath where we test the right and left keys, let's set up a new conditional. Just like we did for the right and left keys, we're going to look at the input class, getKeyUp, and we're going to test that the absolute value of y is now less than the maximum velocity of y. And on the next line, we're going to set the force y to equal the jet speed. If we save our script and go back into Unity and run it, you'll see that the jetpack works. Here we can fly up and we can move left and right. Sometimes you'll see that the player might fly off of the screen, and that's because we're not adding any drag. We can fix this by changing the amount of speed that's applied to the player when he moves left and right when in the air. Let's go back into our script, and we're going to set up a new variable that'll represent an airspeed multiplier. And we're going to set this to 0.3f. So in order to actually do this, what we're going to want to do is multiply the airspeed multiplier by the speed we apply to our force x. We'll start when we get the right key down. We're going to change this to a ternary operation, which is like a conditional, but put on one single line. We're going to be testing that standing is true. By using a question mark, we'll return a value that represents that this condition actually passes. In this case, we're just going to return the speed as normal. So if the player is standing on the ground, we're going to return speed. If not, for the else statement, we'll use a semicolon, and here we're going to take the speed value and we're going to multiply it by the airspeed multiplier. This will actually reduce our normal speed by the fraction of 0.3 so that when the player is moving in the air, they'll actually move a little bit slower to the left and right. Here, we can copy this value and apply it to where we move with the left key, making sure that we change speed to negative in both places. Let's hit save and go back into Unity. We'll rerun the code. And now when the player is in the air, you'll see that they move a little bit slower to the left and the right. Now let's make sure to save our scene so that we can start talking about how to abstract out the way we actually capture key events in order to control our player.